My name is Nick Brenner, and I used to think I was living the American dream. 41 years old, steady job as an IT systems engineer for a mid-sized company in Cleveland, 2 kids in college, and a wife who still turned heads when she walked into a room. The house was paid off, the cars ran fine, and I had enough money in my 401k to pretend I wasn't going to die at my desk. But here's the thing about dreams. Sometimes you wake up and realize you've been sleepwalking through a nightmare. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. It started with little things. Marta coming home later and later from her job at Morrison & Associates, the advertising agency downtown, where she worked as a creative director. She'd walk through the door at 9, 10, sometimes 11 at night, claiming she was working on some big campaign for a client whose name she could never quite remember when I asked. "You wouldn't understand, Nick," she'd say, not even looking up from her phone as she scrolled through what I assumed were work emails. It's complicated, creative stuff. Our intimate life had flatlined somewhere around the time Ross graduated high school and Amelia started her sophomore year at Ohio State. We were officially empty nesters, which according to every marriage counselor and women's magazine should have meant we were rediscovering each other. Instead, we'd discovered that without the kids as a buffer, we had about as much chemistry as a wet match. "Our bedroom's so cold, I'm thinking of renting it out as a morgue," I told my best friend Curtis one Friday night at Murphy's Bar, our usual spot for drowning the sorrows of middle age. Curtis laughed, nearly choking on his beer. "At least you'd make some money off it. Sandra and I haven't touched each other since Obama was in office. The first time." Curtis worked security at the same office complex where Marta's agency was located. He was one of those guys who noticed everything. Occupational hazard, he called it. He'd been my best friend since high school, back when we both thought we'd be rock stars by 30 and millionaires by 40. Now we were just 2 guys in our 40s wondering where the hell the time went. The first real warning sign came on a Tuesday in October. I was doing laundry, because apparently that was my job now, along with grocery shopping, cooking, and basically everything else that kept our household functioning, when I found a receipt in Marta's jacket pocket. The Ritz-Carlton downtown, room service for 2, champagne. The date was 3 days ago when Marta had supposedly been in meetings until midnight. I stared at that receipt for a long time, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. There could be an explanation. Maybe she was entertaining a client. Maybe it was a business dinner that ran late, and they comped her a room so she wouldn't have to drive home. Maybe I was an idiot. I confronted her that night when she came home at 10:30, claiming she'd been stuck in traffic. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the receipt. She barely glanced at it. "Client dinner, the Morrison account. You know how these things go." "Since when do client dinners include hotel rooms?" "It ran late. I didn't want to drive home after drinking." She was still looking at her phone, fingers flying over the screen. "God, Nick, do we have to do this now? I'm exhausted." I wanted to push harder, but something in her tone warned me off. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe this was just what happened to marriages after 20 years. You started seeing conspiracies in hotel receipts and late nights at the office. But then I started paying attention. The way she angled her phone away from me when she texted. The new clothes that appeared in her closet. Expensive stuff that I knew damn well wasn't coming out of her salary. The fact that she'd started wearing perfume again, something she hadn't done in years. And the way she looked at me sometimes when she thought I wasn't watching. Like she was seeing a stranger. Or worse, like she was seeing someone she used to love, but couldn't quite remember why. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when she was in the shower. Her phone was sitting on the nightstand, and it buzzed with a text message. I told myself I was just glancing to see if it was one of the kids, but the preview on the lock screen made my blood run cold. "Last night was incredible. When can we do it again? Jay." I sat there staring at that message until the screen went dark, then stared at my own reflection in the black glass. 20 years of marriage, 2 kids, a mortgage, a life we'd built together, brick by brick, year by year, and she was throwing it away for someone whose name started with J. The shower was still running. I could hear Marta singing, actually singing, something she hadn't done in months. She sounded happy, happier than I'd heard her sound in our own house in years. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and went downstairs to make coffee. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate the machine. Curtis found me at Murphy's that afternoon, sitting in our usual booth with 3 empty beer bottles in front of me. "Jesus, Nick, you look like hell," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "What happened?" I told him about the text, about the hotel receipt, about the growing certainty that my wife was having an affair. "You need to find out who Jay is," Curtis said. "Could be Jake Turnbull." "Who?" "Jake Turnbull, works at Marta's agency, creative director like her, drives a BMW that costs more than my annual salary. Real smooth operator, if you know what I mean." I did know what he meant. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. The late nights, the new clothes, the way she'd started talking about work like it was the most exciting thing in the world. "What do you know about him?" "Married. Wife's name is Sandra, real ice queen type. Word around the building is that Jake's got a reputation for extracurricular activities." I ordered another beer and tried to process this information. My wife was having an affair with a married man named Jake Turnbull, a man who apparently made a habit of screwing around on his wife. "What are you going to do?" Curtis asked. That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? What does a middle-aged IT guy do when he discovers his wife is cheating? Confront her? Hire a private investigator? File for divorce and split everything 50-50? Or do something else entirely? "I don't know," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I could feel something shifting inside me. Something cold and calculating that I'd never felt before. Something that scared me a little, and excited me a lot. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of watching Marta lie to my face every single day. 3 weeks of pretending I didn't know what I knew, of playing the clueless husband while she snuck around behind my back. I'd started keeping a journal. Not because I'm the diary type, but because I wanted to document everything. Every lie, every late night, every time she claimed to be somewhere she wasn't. October 15th. Marta says she's working late on the Morrison account. Curtis texts me at 8 p.m. Her car isn't in the agency parking lot. October 18th. She comes home with a new necklace. Says it was a gift from a grateful client. I've never seen a client give expensive jewelry to their ad exec, but what do I know? October 22nd. She's in the shower again, phone buzzing. This time the message says, "Can't wait for tomorrow night, the usual place, Jay." I was building a case piece by piece, not for a divorce lawyer, I wasn't ready for that yet. I was building a case for something else, something that would make Jake Turnbull and my cheating wife understand exactly what they'd done to me. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. At 3:17 a.m. on a rainy Thursday morning in November, Marta shook me awake. I came up from sleep slowly, confused and disoriented. Nick, wake up." She was already dressed, her face pale in the dim light from the hallway. Her hands were shaking. "What's wrong?" I asked, sitting up and checking the clock. "Is it one of the kids?" "No, just get dressed. Please, don't ask questions." There was something in her voice I'd never heard before, pure terror. "Marta, what the hell is going on?" "Please, Nick, just trust me, get dressed and come with me, now." I'd been married to this woman for 20 years. I knew her moods, her tells, her ways of manipulating me into doing what she wanted. This wasn't manipulation. This was genuine fear. I got dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a sweater while Marta paced by the bedroom door. She kept checking her phone, her face getting paler by the minute. "Are we going to the hospital?" I asked. Did something happen to your parents? To Victoria? Victoria was Marta's younger sister, a perpetually single woman in her 30s who seemed to specialize in creating drama wherever she went. She and Marta had always been close. Too close, in my opinion. Victoria had never liked me, and the feeling was mutual. "Just come on," Marta said, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the stairs. We drove through the empty streets of Cleveland in silence. Marta was behind the wheel, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. The rain was coming down hard, turning the streetlights into blurry halos in the darkness. "Nothing says romance like a felony at dawn," I muttered, trying to lighten the mood. Marta didn't laugh. She didn't even seem to hear me. We were heading toward the warehouse district on the east side of town, an area that had been slowly gentrifying, but still had plenty of abandoned buildings and empty lots. Not exactly the kind of place you wanted to be at 3:30 in the morning. "Marta, seriously, you're scaring me. What are we doing?" She pulled into the parking lot of what looked like an old factory. The building was dark except for a few lights on the ground floor. There were several other cars in the lot. Cars I recognized. My parents' old Honda Civic, Ross's beat-up Ford pickup, Amelia's red Volkswagen that we'd bought her for her 18th birthday. "Jesus Christ," I breathed. "What the hell is this?" Marta turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the building. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm so sorry, Nick. I tried to stop it. I tried to get out, but he said if I didn't bring you, he'd kill them." "Kill who? Who are we talking about?" But I already knew. The cars in the parking lot told the whole story. Our kids, our parents, probably Victoria too. Someone had taken our entire family hostage, and they'd used my cheating wife to deliver me to them. We walked through the rain to a side door that was propped open with a brick. Inside, the building was mostly empty except for some old machinery and a few folding chairs arranged in a circle under a harsh fluorescent light. In those chairs, tied up and gagged, were the most important people in my life. Ross and Amelia, both crying, both trying to say something through the duct tape over their mouths. My parents, looking older and frailer than I'd ever seen them. Marta's parents, her mother sobbing silently, and Victoria, her eyes wild with terror above the silver tape. Standing behind them, looking like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine, was Jake Turnbull. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, handsome, perfectly groomed even at 3:30 in the morning. He wore an expensive suit and a smile that probably cost more than my car. In his right hand was a gun. "Thanks for bringing him, Marta," Jake said, his voice smooth and cultured. "Just like we planned." I looked at my wife, understanding flooding through me like ice water. "So, this is a team-building exercise, or—" Jake laughed. "I like your sense of humor, Nick. I can see why Marta married you." "Well, one of the reasons." "Let them go," I said, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. "Whatever this is about, it's between us. Leave the family out of it." "Oh, but it is about family," Jake said, walking over to where Ross was tied up. He put the gun against my son's temple, and Ross's eyes went wide with terror. "It's about what you're willing to do for family, how much you're willing to sacrifice." "What do you want?" Jake reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila folder. "I want you to sign these papers. Transfer of ownership for your house, your car, your bank accounts, your 401k, your life insurance policies, everything you own, Nick, everything you've worked for." I stared at the papers, then at the gun pressed against my son's head. "And if I don't?" "Then I start shooting people you love. Starting with Ross here, then moving on to Amelia, then your parents, then Marta's parents. I'll save Victoria for last. She's been very helpful in planning this little gathering." I looked at Victoria, and she looked away. Of course. Marta's bitter, jealous sister had been in on this from the beginning. "You bastard," I said. Now. No need for name-calling. This is just business, Nick. You sign the papers, transfer everything to me, and everyone walks away. You can start over. Get a job, rent an apartment. Think of it as an early retirement. And Marta? What's her role in all this? Jake smiled and put his free hand on Marta's shoulder. She flinched, but didn't pull away. Marta and I are going to disappear for a while. Maybe Europe, maybe the Caribbean. We haven't decided yet, but don't worry, I'll take good care of her. I looked at my wife, and she was crying now. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never wanted it to go this far. I tried to stop him, but he said... She said you were a pushover, Jake interrupted. Said you'd never fight back. Said you'd just roll over and take it like you always do. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because Jake had said them, but because I could hear Marta's voice saying them. I could picture her lying in bed with this man, talking about what a weak, pathetic husband she had. You should see her at the office after hours, Jake continued, clearly enjoying himself. She likes it risky. The desk, the conference room, even the supply closet once. She's very... creative. Shut up, Marta said, but her voice was barely a whisper. I took the papers from Jake and looked them over. Standard transfer documents, all legal and binding. If I signed these, I'd be left with nothing. 20 years of work, of saving, of building a life, gone. But if I didn't sign them, my family would die. I looked at Ross, at Amelia, at my parents, at the people I'd die for without hesitation. Give me a pen, I said. Jake's smile widened. I knew you'd see reason. I signed the papers one by one, transferring everything I owned to Jake Turnbull, my house, my savings, my retirement, my future. When I was finished, Jake took the papers and looked them over. Perfect, he said. You know, Nick, you're taking this much better than I expected. Marta said you'd probably cry. That's when I heard the sirens. They started as a distant wail, then got louder and louder until the sound was overwhelming. Lights flooded the warehouse windows, red and blue and blindingly bright. Jake's smile disappeared. What the hell? The side door exploded inward, and suddenly the warehouse was full of FBI agents in tactical gear, shouting orders and pointing weapons. Drop your weapon! Get on the ground! Now! Jake looked around wildly, the gun still in his hand. For a moment, I thought he might start shooting, might try to take as many of us with him as he could. Instead, he looked at me. You bastard, he said. You knew. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Maybe I should have worn my brown pants, I said. Here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. Eventually, you learn to use it as a weapon. While the FBI agents cuffed Jake and his two associates, who'd been hiding in the shadows like the cowards they were, I watched my family being untied and comforted. Ross was trying to act tough, but I could see his hands shaking. Amelia was crying and holding on to my mother. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night. But they were alive, they were safe, and Jake Turnbull was going to prison. How long have you known? Marta asked me as we stood outside the warehouse, watching Jake get loaded into the back of an FBI van. About the affair? 3 months? About this? I gestured toward the warehouse. 2 weeks. She stared at me. 2 weeks? Victoria's not as smart as she thinks she is. She called the house last Tuesday when you were supposedly at work. Wanted to know if you'd talked me into it yet. When I pressed her, she hung up. But it got me thinking. The truth was more complicated than that, but I wasn't ready to tell Marta everything. Not yet. I'd known about the affair for months, just like I'd told her, but I'd started suspecting something bigger was going on when I noticed Jake's financial situation didn't match his lifestyle. Curtis had done some digging for me. Turns out Jake was in debt up to his eyeballs. Expensive car payments, a mortgage on a house he couldn't afford, credit cards maxed out. A man like that, having an affair with a woman whose husband had a decent savings account and a paid-off house? Well, it didn't take a genius to see where that might lead. So I'd started preparing. First, I'd gone to the FBI. Not with accusations, I didn't have proof yet. But I'd expressed concerns about potential extortion and kidnapping. I'd given them Jake's name, Victoria's name, and a detailed account of everything I suspected. Then I'd started setting traps. I'd moved most of our real money into accounts Jake didn't know about. The papers I'd signed tonight were real, but they transferred ownership of assets that were mostly worthless. A house with a secret second mortgage, bank accounts with minimal balances, a 401k that I'd already rolled over into my parents' names. And I'd convinced Marta to help me. That had been the hardest part. When I'd finally confronted her about the affair 2 weeks ago, she'd broken down completely, told me everything, how Jake had seduced her, how he'd gradually isolated her from her friends and family, how he'd started making demands. He said if I didn't help him, he'd tell everyone about us. She'd sobbed. He'd ruin my career, destroy my reputation. And then he started talking about you, about the kids. He said he knew people who could hurt you. It had taken everything I had not to drive straight to Jake's house and beat him to death with my bare hands. Instead, I'd held my wife while she cried and told her we were going to destroy him. Together. You used me, she said now, watching the FBI van disappear into the night. You used me first, I replied. The difference is, I used you to save our family. You used me to help your boyfriend rob us blind. She didn't have an answer for that. The FBI agent in charge, a woman named Sarah Chen, came over to brief us on what happened next. We'll need statements from all of you, she said. And Mr. Brenner, we'll need you to come in tomorrow to go over your evidence in detail. Evidence? Agent Chen smiled. The recordings you made, the financial documents, the communications you intercepted. You've been building quite a case against Mr. Turnbull. Marta looked at me with something that might have been admiration or might have been fear. You recorded everything? Everything, I confirmed. Every conversation with Victoria. Every lie you told me about where you were going. Every time Jake called the house and hung up when I answered. I'd been wearing a wire for the past week with the FBI's help. Every word Jake had said tonight was recorded. His threats, his confessions, his detailed description of the affair, all of it admissible in court. He's going away for a long time, Agent Chen said. Kidnapping, extortion, conspiracy. We're talking 25 to life. As we drove home in separate cars, Marta in her Honda, me in the FBI vehicle that would take me to give my statement, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. But it didn't last long. The next morning, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee and reading the news coverage of Jake's arrest when someone started pounding on my front door. I opened it to find Sandra Turnbull, Jake's wife, standing on my porch. She was a tall, thin woman with sharp features and cold eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept. "You bastard," she said, pushing past me into the house. "Good morning to you too, Sandra. Coffee? You destroyed my life. I'm pretty sure your husband did that all by himself." She spun around to face me, her face twisted with rage. "Jake told me everything. How you set him up. How you manipulated that whore wife of yours into betraying him." Interesting perspective. Here I thought Jake was the one who kidnapped my family and tried to steal everything I own. He was desperate. We were about to lose the house, the cars, everything. He needed that money. So he decided to take mine. You have more than you need. A middle-aged nobody with a boring job and a boring life. Jake has vision. He has dreams. He could have done something important with that money. I stared at her, amazed by the sheer audacity of it. And what about my dreams, Sandra? What about my family's future? Your family will be fine. You'll get other jobs, make other money. But Jake's life is over. 25 years in prison for what? For trying to better himself. For kidnapping, for extortion, for threatening to murder my children. Sandra's face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I won't let you get away with this," she said. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are, what you did to my husband. Feel free. I'm sure the newspapers would love to hear your side of the story." She left then, but not before promising that this wasn't over, that she'd make me pay for destroying her marriage, her life, her future. I watched her drive away in Jake's BMW. Apparently the FBI hadn't seized all their assets yet, and felt the first stirring of something dark in my chest. Jake was gone. He'd spend the rest of his life in prison, and good riddance. But Sandra was still out there, and so was Victoria, who'd somehow managed to avoid getting arrested despite her role in the kidnapping plot. And Marta, well, Marta was upstairs in our bedroom packing her things. She came down an hour later with 2 suitcases and a guilty expression. "I'm going to stay with Victoria for a while," she said, "until we figure out what happens next. What happens next is we get divorced and you start over." "I know, I need time to think." "About what?" She looked around the kitchen, at the life we'd built together, at the man she'd betrayed. "About how I became someone I don't recognize," she said quietly. After she left, I sat in my empty house and tried to figure out what I was feeling. Relief, sadness, anger, all of the above probably. But mostly, I felt like I was just getting started. Jake Turnbull had tried to destroy my life and failed. But in the process, he'd awakened something in me that I'd never known existed. Something that didn't believe in forgiveness. Something that believed in revenge. The local news picked up the story 3 days later. "Local man foils kidnapping plot" was the headline in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, complete with a photo of Jake being led away in handcuffs. They painted me as the hero, the clever husband who'd outsmarted the criminals and saved his family. If only they knew the whole truth. The truth was, I was just getting started. Sandra Turnbull made good on her threat to destroy my reputation. Within a week of Jake's arrest, stories started appearing on social media. Anonymous posts on neighborhood Facebook groups, comments on news articles, whispers in grocery store checkout lines. Nick Brenner had set up his wife's lover. Nick Brenner had entrapped an innocent man. Nick Brenner was vindictive, calculating, dangerous. Some of it was even true. "You need to let this go," Curtis told me over beers at Murphy's the following Friday. "Jake's in jail, Marta's moved out, and you've got your life back. Don't let Sandra drag you down to her level." "Her level? She's defending a man who kidnapped my children. She's a woman whose husband is going to prison for 25 years. People do crazy things when they're desperate." I understood that. What I didn't understand was why everyone expected me to be the bigger person, to turn the other cheek, to forgive and forget. I'd spent 41 years being the nice guy, the pushover, the man who never made waves. And where had it gotten me? A cheating wife, a destroyed marriage, and a family that had nearly been murdered because I was too weak to see the threat coming. Well, I wasn't weak anymore. The first phase of my revenge was simple. I started telling the truth. Not the sanitized version I'd given to the police and the FBI. The whole truth, with all the dirty details that Sandra and Victoria probably thought I'd keep to myself out of embarrassment. I started with Jake's business partner, Frank Morrison. Jake had been embezzling from their agency for months, skimming money from client accounts to fund his lifestyle. I had proof, bank records, forged invoices, altered contracts, all of it perfectly legal evidence that I'd obtained through my own investigation. Frank fired Jake posthumously and sued his estate for damages. The agency went under within a month. Then I went after Victoria. Marta's sister had been the inside woman in Jake's plot, feeding him information about our family, our finances, our routines. She'd helped plan the kidnapping, recruited the muscle, and provided the warehouse location through a contact at her real estate job. But the FBI hadn't been able to prove her involvement beyond a reasonable doubt, so she'd walked away free. I wasn't going to let that stand. Victoria worked for a small real estate company in Lakewood, She was already on thin ice with her boss due to poor sales numbers and customer complaints. It didn't take much to push her over the edge. A few anonymous tips to the Ohio Real Estate Commission about her ethics violations, some negative reviews on Yelp and Google from clients she'd supposedly screwed over, a carefully orchestrated campaign to destroy her professional reputation. She was fired within 2 weeks. But that wasn't enough. Not for someone who'd helped plan my family's kidnapping. Victoria lived in a small apartment complex that catered to young professionals and recent divorcees. The kind of place where everyone minded their own business and no one asked too many questions. Perfect for what I had in mind. I started small. Anonymous noise complaints to the apartment management, reports of strange smells coming from her unit, suggestions that she might be running some kind of illegal business out of her home. Then I escalated. Victoria had a weakness for online shopping and expensive wine. She also had terrible internet security habits, the same password for everything, no two-factor authentication, and a tendency to click on links without thinking. It wasn't hard to hack her email and social media accounts, or to use those accounts to make some very embarrassing purchases and posts. The dildo collection that arrived at her office was bad enough. The racist rants that appeared on her Facebook page, posted at 3 a.m. when she'd have been drunk, of course, were what really did the damage. She was evicted from her apartment and ostracized by her social circle within a month. "You're scaring me," Curtis said when I told him about Victoria's downfall. "This isn't like you, Nick. Maybe this is exactly like me. Maybe I just never had a reason to show it before. Or maybe you're becoming someone you don't want to be." I thought about that. Was I becoming someone I didn't want to be? Or was I finally becoming someone I should have been all along? The answer came when Sandra Turnbull showed up at my office. I was working late on a Thursday night, trying to catch up on some server maintenance, when security called to tell me I had a visitor. I figured it was Curtis, stopping by to drag me out for a beer and another lecture about letting go of my anger. Instead, I found Sandra waiting in the lobby, looking like she'd been crying for days. "We need to talk," she said. I almost told security to escort her out. But something in her voice stopped me. "5 minutes," I said. We went up to my office, a small, cluttered space filled with computer equipment and empty coffee cups. Sandra looked around like she'd never seen anything so pathetic. "This is where you work? This is the life Jake was supposed to envy? What do you want, Sandra?" She sat down in the chair across from my desk and stared at me with those cold, dead eyes. "I want you to leave my family alone." "Your family?" "Jake's in prison, and as far as I know, you don't have any kids." "My sister, Victoria." I blinked. "Victoria is your sister." "Half-sister, same father, different mothers. She was trying to help me save my marriage." The pieces clicked into place. Victoria hadn't just been helping Jake out of loyalty to Marta. She'd been helping her own sister save her marriage and her lifestyle. "Interesting family dynamic," I said. "Your half-sister helps your husband kidnap my family so you can steal my money and save your house." "We were desperate." "So you've said. What does that have to do with me?" Sandra leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know what you've been doing to her. The job, the apartment, the other things. You're destroying her life. She helped destroy mine first. She made a mistake. She was trying to help family. She committed multiple felonies. The only reason she's not in jail is because the FBI couldn't prove she was involved." "But you know she was involved." "Yes." "And you're making her pay for it." "Yes." Sandra nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. "What kind of man are you?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. 6 months ago, I would have said I was a good man. A kind man. A man who believed in forgiveness and second chances. But that man's wife had cheated on him. That man's family had been kidnapped. That man had been betrayed by people he'd trusted. That man was gone. I'm the kind of man who doesn't forget, I said finally. And I don't forgive. Sandra stood up, smoothing down her skirt. Then you and I understand each other perfectly, she said. She left my office and I went back to work. But I couldn't concentrate. Something about her tone, about the way she'd looked at me in those final moments, set off alarm bells in my head. I called Curtis and asked him to keep an eye on the building's security cameras for the next few days, just in case. In case of what? In case Sandra Turnbull is as vindictive as I am. As it turned out, she was more vindictive, and a lot more dangerous. The attack on my reputation started subtly. A few negative reviews of my work on professional websites, some anonymous complaints to my boss about my attitude and performance, whispers that I was unstable, vindictive, possibly dangerous. Dave Morrison, my supervisor, called me into his office on a Monday morning in December. Nick, we need to talk. Dave was a good guy, former military, straight shooter, the kind of boss who backed his people when they were right and called them out when they were wrong. I'd worked for him for 8 years, without a single complaint. What's up? I've been getting some unusual feedback about your work lately, and about you personally. What kind of feedback? Dave pulled out a manila folder and opened it. Anonymous emails claiming you've been hacking into client systems without authorization. Phone calls suggesting you've been using company resources for personal vendettas. And this. He handed me a printed screenshot of a social media post. It was from a local neighborhood watch Facebook group, and it showed a photo of me taken outside my house. Dangerous man alert, the post read. This man, Nick Brenner, recently orchestrated an elaborate scheme to destroy his wife's lover and his own sister-in-law. He's vindictive, calculating, and has access to sensitive computer systems. Keep your families safe. The post had been shared 47 times. Dave, this is complete bullshit. Someone's trying to... I know, Dave interrupted. I've worked with you for 8 years, Nick. I know what kind of man you are, but I also know what kind of pressure the company's under right now. We can't afford to have clients questioning our security practices. So what are you saying? I'm saying you need to make this go away, fast, before it gets worse. I took the folder and left Dave's office, my hands shaking with rage. Sandra Turnbull wasn't just coming after me. She was coming after my livelihood, my career, everything I had left. Well, 2 could play that game. I spent my lunch break in my car, making phone calls and doing research. By the end of the day, I had a plan. Sandra worked as a part-time bookkeeper for several small businesses around Cleveland. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and gave her the flexibility to maintain her lifestyle while Jake was indisposed. Her biggest client was a restaurant chain called Tony's Pizza, a local institution with 5 locations around the city. Sandra handled their payroll, their taxes, and their financial reporting. She also, it turned out, had been skimming money from their accounts for months. I didn't plant the evidence. I didn't need to. Sandra had been stealing to fund Jake's expensive tastes, probably figuring she could pay it back once their plan to rob me succeeded. All I had to do was point the right people in the right direction. An anonymous tip to Tony's Pizza's owner. A few carefully worded suggestions about where he might want to look in his financial records. Some helpful hints about which months showed the biggest discrepancies. Sandra was fired and arrested within a week. But I wasn't done. Jake's BMW, the one Sandra had been driving since his arrest, was still parked in the driveway of their house. A beautiful, pristine symbol of everything they'd tried to steal from me. I waited until 2 a.m. on a Saturday night, then drove to their neighborhood with a bag of supplies. Sardine oil, which I spread liberally on the leather seats. Raw shrimp, which I stuffed into the air conditioning vents, and a can of spray paint for the final touch. Coward across the hood in bright red letters. I filmed the whole thing on my phone and uploaded it to the same Neighborhood Watch Facebook group where Sandra had posted my photo. Justice served, I captioned it. This is what happens when you mess with the wrong family. The video went viral locally. Within 24 hours, it had been shared over 500 times and had dozens of comments ranging from supportive, good for you, to concerned, this guy needs help. I didn't care about the concerned ones. Curtis found me at Murphy's that Saturday night, celebrating my small victory with a whiskey and a satisfied smile. Jesus Christ, Nick, the BMW? Really? It's just property damage. Insurance will cover it. That's not the point. You're escalating this thing beyond all reason. They escalated it when they kidnapped my family. Jake escalated it. Jake's in prison. Sandra's in jail. It's over. It's not over until I say it's over. Curtis stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. What happened to you, man? You used to be, I don't know, reasonable. Reasonable men get their families kidnapped and their wives stolen. I'm done being reasonable. The next phase of my campaign began on Monday morning when Sandra was released on bail. She came straight to my house, pounding on the door at 7 a.m. while I was getting ready for work. I opened the door to find her looking like hell. Unwashed hair, wrinkled clothes, eyes red from crying or lack of sleep or both. "You bastard," she said. "You planted that evidence." "What evidence?" "The missing money, the forged checks. You set me up, just like you set up Jake." "Sandra, I'm an IT guy, not an accountant. I wouldn't know how to forge a check if my life depended on it." "You're lying." "Prove it." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact moment when she realized she couldn't. Because I hadn't forged anything. I'd simply revealed what she'd already done. "This isn't over," she said. "I know," I replied, "but you're losing." She left, and I went to work with a spring in my step. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my life again. That feeling lasted until Thursday, when Marta called me at the office. "Nick, we need to talk. It's about Ross and Amelia." "What about them?" "Someone's been calling them, at school, telling them things about what you've been doing, about the BMW, about Victoria losing her job. They're scared, Nick. They think you're having some kind of breakdown." I closed my eyes and felt the familiar rage building in my chest. "Let me guess. Anonymous phone calls?" "Yes. But Nick, even if Sandra is behind this, maybe she has a point. Maybe you need to—" "Maybe I need to what? Let her destroy my reputation? Let her get away with helping to kidnap my children? Maybe you need to stop before you become someone our kids don't recognize." That night, I sat in my empty house and thought about what Marta had said. Was I becoming someone my kids didn't recognize? Someone I didn't recognize? The answer was yes. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe the man I used to be, the pushover, the nice guy, the one who never fought back. Maybe he'd been the problem all along. Maybe it was time for Nick Brenner to become someone worth fearing. The final phase of my war with Sandra Turnbull began the next morning when I woke up to find my house had been vandalized. Psycho was spray painted across my garage door in the same red paint I'd used on Jake's BMW. My mailbox had been smashed, my windows had been soaked, and someone had dumped a bag of garbage on my front lawn. But the real message was waiting on my front porch. A photo of Ross walking across the Ohio State campus, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. On the back, someone had written, "Your turn to be scared." That's when I knew Sandra Turnbull had made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd threatened my children, and that was something I would never, ever forgive. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Friday night in January. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the wind howl outside, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Get dressed. Don't ask questions." The voice was electronically distorted, but I knew who it was. Sandra Turnbull was using my own wife's words against me, echoing the night Jake had tried to destroy my life. "Sandra, you have 30 minutes to get to the warehouse district. Same building where your husband's boyfriend tried to rob you. Come alone, or your children die." The line went dead. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. This was it. The final confrontation I'd been expecting since the day Jake was arrested. Sandra had been escalating for weeks, getting more desperate, more dangerous. Now she was going to try to finish what her husband had started. But I wasn't the same man who'd walked into that warehouse 3 months ago. I wasn't the pushover who'd signed away everything he owned to save his family. I was someone else now, someone harder, someone who'd learned that the only way to deal with people like Sandra and Jake was to be more ruthless than they were. I got dressed quickly and grabbed the bag I'd been keeping in my closet, the one I'd hoped I'd never need to use. Then I drove through the empty streets toward the warehouse district, my mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. The same building was dark except for a few lights on the ground floor. But this time, there were no other cars in the parking lot, no family members being held hostage, just Sandra, playing out some twisted fantasy of revenge. I parked and walked to the same side door we'd used before. It was propped open with a brick, just like last time. Inside, the building looked exactly the same, empty except for the folding chairs under the harsh fluorescent light. But the chairs weren't empty. Sitting in them, tied up and gagged just like my family had been, were 3 people I didn't recognize. 2 men and a woman, all middle-aged, all terrified. Standing behind them was Sandra, holding the same type of gun Jake had used. "Punctual," she said. "I like that in a man." "Who are they?" I asked, nodding toward the hostages. "Nobody you know, just some people who owed my husband money. Business associates." "Let them go, Sandra. This is between us." "Oh, but it's not just between us anymore, is it, Nick? You made it bigger than that when you destroyed my sister's life, when you humiliated me, when you turned my husband into a national joke." She was pacing now, the gun waving dangerously as she gestured. "You want to know the funny thing? Jake really thought he was the smart one. He thought he had it all figured out, seduce the lonely housewife, manipulate her into betraying her husband, steal everything and disappear to some tropical paradise. Sounds about right. But he was wrong about one thing. He thought you were weak. He thought you'd just roll over and take it. He wasn't entirely wrong. 6 months ago, I probably would have." Sandra stopped pacing and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "What changed?" I realized that being the good guy is a luxury I couldn't afford anymore, not when people like you and Jake exist in the world. People like us? Predators. People who take what they want and destroy anyone who gets in their way. Sandra laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the warehouse walls. "You think you're different from us? You think what you've been doing to me and Victoria is somehow noble? I think it's necessary. You destroyed my sister's life. You cost me my job, my freedom, my marriage. You destroyed those things yourself when you decided to help Jake kidnap my family. We were desperate. So am I." That's when I pulled out my own gun. Sandra's eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" "Same place Jake got his, probably. Turns out it's not that hard to buy a gun when you put your mind to it." "You won't use it. You're not a killer, Nick. You're just a sad middle-aged man who got cuckolded by his wife." "You're right. I'm not a killer, but I'm not the same man I was 3 months ago either." I raised the gun and pointed it at her chest. "Let them go." "Or what? You'll shoot me in front of 3 witnesses?" "Who said anything about witnesses?" Sandra looked confused for a moment. Then understanding dawned on her face. "They're not random hostages, are they?" "Frank Morrison, Jake's business partner. The one who lost everything when your husband's embezzlement came to light. Maria Santos, the accountant who got fired when Tony's Pizza discovered your theft. And David Chen, the landlord who had to evict Victoria from her apartment." Sandra stared at the 3 people tied to the chairs, then back at me. "You brought them here." "I brought them here. They all have very good reasons to want revenge on you and your family. And they all agreed to help me get it." That's when the 3 hostages started untying themselves. Frank Morrison stood up first, pulling the duct tape off his mouth. "Hello, Sandra. We need to talk." Maria Santos was next, flexing her fingers as she worked, feeling back into her hands. "About the money you stole from us." David Chen removed his gag and smiled coldly at Sandra. "And the lies you told about us." Sandra spun around, pointing her gun at each of them in turn. "This is insane. You're all insane. We're all people whose lives you helped destroy," I said, "and we decided it was time to return the favor." "What do you want?" "Justice," Frank said. "Compensation," Maria added. "Revenge," David finished. Sandra looked around the warehouse wildly, realizing she was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "This is kidnapping. Conspiracy. You'll all go to prison." "Will we?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you lured me here at gunpoint. It looks like you were planning to kill me and frame these 3 innocent people for it." "It's not what? Not true? Not what a jury will believe when they see the evidence?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. It was recording video. "Smile, Sandra. You're going to be famous." That's when she snapped. Sandra screamed and raised her gun, but she wasn't fast enough. Frank Morrison tackled her from behind, sending her crashing to the concrete floor. The gun skittered away across the warehouse. Maria Santos kicked it toward me, and I picked it up. "Is everyone okay?" I asked. "We're fine," David said, rubbing his wrists where the rope had been. "Nice performance, by the way." "Thanks. You all did great." Sandra was lying on the floor, Frank's knee in her back, cursing and struggling. "This is illegal," she screamed. "This is entrapment." "This is justice," I said. I called 911 and reported an attempted murder. When the police arrived 15 minutes later, they found Sandra Turnbull with an illegal firearm, making threats against 4 upstanding citizens who'd simply been trying to resolve their business disputes with her in a civilized manner. The fact that she'd lured me to the warehouse with threats against my children, all recorded on my phone, didn't help her case. The fact that she'd been caught with detailed plans for murdering me and framing the others, plans I'd planted in her purse while Frank was restraining her, sealed her fate. Sandra Turnbull was arrested and charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and weapons violations. She joined her husband in the county jail, where they could spend their remaining years together. As for Victoria, she disappeared somewhere between Sandra's arrest and the media coverage that followed. Probably changed her name and moved to another state, trying to start over. I hoped she'd learned her lesson, but I doubted it. Standing outside the warehouse, watching Sandra get loaded into the back of a police car, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Satisfaction. Frank, Maria, and David shook my hand and thanked me for giving them the chance to get their revenge. They'd all lost money, jobs, and reputations because of Sandra and Jake's schemes. Tonight had been their chance to get some of that back. "What happens now?" Frank asked. "Now we go back to our lives," I said, "and we remember what happens to people who try to destroy innocent families." I drove home through the empty streets, thinking about how much had changed since that night in November when Marta had shaken me awake. I'd lost a wife, but I'd gained something more valuable: respect, from my enemies, from my allies, and most importantly, from myself. The next morning, Ross called me from college. "Dad, I saw the news. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, son. Better than fine." "The woman who was harassing us, she's really going to prison?" "For a very long time." There was a long pause. "Dad, I'm proud of you, for fighting back, for protecting us." "Thanks, Ross. That means everything to me." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and looked around at the life I'd built. The house was quiet, empty without Marta, but it was mine. I'd fought for it, bled for it, and won it back from people who'd tried to take it away. I was 41 years old, divorced, and starting over. But I was also the man who'd taken down Jake Turnbull and Sandra Turnbull and Victoria Martinez. I was the man who'd turned the tables on his enemies and made them pay for their crimes. I was the man who'd learned that sometimes the only way to deal with evil is to become something they fear more than they fear the law, and I was just getting started. The media circus began the next morning. Local man Foyle's second kidnapping plot was the headline in the Plain Dealer. The TV news crews were setting up on my front lawn by 8 a.m., their satellite trucks blocking traffic and sending Mrs. Green into a frenzy of curtain-twitching excitement. I stood at my living room window, drinking coffee and watching the chaos, when my doorbell rang. It was Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI, looking official and slightly amused. "Mr. Brenner, quite a night you had." "Just another Friday in Cleveland." She smiled. "Mind if I come in? We need to talk about what happened at the warehouse." I let her in and poured her a cup of coffee. We sat at my kitchen table while the news crews set up their equipment outside. "Tell me about your 3 friends," she said. "What about them? How did you convince 3 strangers to help you stage an elaborate sting operation against Sandra Turnbull?" "They weren't strangers. They were victims. Sandra and Jake had hurt all of them, and they wanted justice." "Justice, or revenge. Is there a difference?" Agent Chen studied me for a long moment. 6 months ago, you were a mild-mannered IT worker with no criminal record and no history of violence. Now you're orchestrating complex operations against organized criminals. That's quite a transformation." People change when they're pushed hard enough. Some people break, others become dangerous. Which one am I? I'm still trying to figure that out. She finished her coffee and stood up. "For what it's worth, Mr. Brenner, Sandra Turnbull is going to prison for a long time. Her husband's already pleading guilty to avoid the death penalty. And the 3 people who helped you last night are all getting their lives back." "Good. But this ends here. Whatever vendetta you think you're pursuing, it's over. Do you understand me?" I walked her to the door. "Agent Chen, I'm a law-abiding citizen who's been the victim of multiple crimes. All I've ever done is cooperate with law enforcement and protect my family. Just make sure it stays that way." After she left, I went outside to face the media. The reporters swarmed me the moment I stepped onto my front porch. Microphones thrust in my face, cameras rolling, questions shouted from every direction. "Mr. Brenner, how does it feel to have stopped 2 kidnapping plots? Were you afraid for your life? What would you say to other families facing similar threats?" I raised my hand for quiet, and gradually the crowd settled down. "I want to make something very clear," I said, looking directly into the cameras. "What happened to my family was not a random crime. It was a calculated attack by people who thought they could destroy us because we seemed weak, because we seemed like easy targets." The reporters were scribbling notes, hanging on every word. "Jake Turnbull seduced my wife and convinced her to betray me. Sandra Turnbull helped plan the kidnapping of my children. Victoria Martinez provided inside information that put my entire family at risk." Mrs. Green had come out onto her porch and was recording everything on her phone. Other neighbors were gathering on the sidewalk, drawn by the commotion. These people thought they could take everything I'd worked for and destroy everyone I loved. They thought I was just another middle-aged nobody who would roll over and let them get away with it. I paused, looking out at the crowd of reporters and neighbors and curious onlookers. They were wrong. "Mr. Brenner," one reporter called out, "some people are saying you went too far in your pursuit of justice, that you became as bad as the people who hurt you. How do you respond to that?" I smiled. "I respond by saying that Jake Turnbull is in prison for 25 years. Sandra Turnbull is facing life in prison. Victoria Martinez is a fugitive who'll spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. And my family is safe." "But what about the methods you used? The surveillance, the manipulation, the what? The legal evidence gathering? The cooperation with law enforcement? The protection of innocent victims?" I stepped closer to the cameras. "Let me tell you something about methods. Jake Turnbull's method was to seduce a married woman and convince her to help him rob her husband. Sandra Turnbull's method was to kidnap children and threaten to murder them. Victoria Martinez's method was to betray her own family for money. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. My method was to fight back. My method was to refuse to be a victim. My method was to make sure that evil people faced consequences for their evil actions. And you don't regret any of it? I thought about that question. Did I regret destroying Victoria's career? Did I regret humiliating Sandra? Did I regret turning Jake's own schemes against him? The only thing I regret, I said finally, is that it took me 41 years to learn how to fight back. The press conference continued for another 20 minutes, but that soundbite was the one that made it onto every news program in the city. By evening, it was trending on social media. By the next day, it had gone viral nationally. "Local man's revenge goes viral" was the new headline. The comments sections were split between people calling me a hero and people calling me a vigilante. I didn't care about either group. What I cared about was the phone call I got that afternoon from Ross. "Dad, I saw your press conference. You looked different." "Different how?" "Stronger. Like you're not afraid of anything anymore." "I'm not." "Good. Because Amelia and I have been talking, and we want you to know something." "What's that?" "We're proud of you, for fighting back, for protecting us, for showing those people that they can't just destroy families and get away with it." "Thanks, son. That means everything to me. We also want you to know that we understand why Mom left, why she couldn't handle what you became." I felt a stab of pain at the mention of Marta. "She made her choice," I said. "Yeah, she did. And you made yours. And we think you made the right one." That night, I sat in my empty house and thought about choices. Marta had chosen Jake over me. She'd chosen excitement over stability, passion over loyalty, lies over truth. And when the consequences of those choices caught up with her, she'd chosen to run rather than face them. Victoria had chosen money over family. She'd chosen to help strangers destroy her own sister's life for the promise of a payoff that never came. Sandra had chosen revenge over reason. She'd chosen to escalate a conflict that was already lost, to threaten innocent children, to become the very monster she accused me of being. And I had chosen to fight back. I'd chosen to stop being the victim and start being the victor. I'd chosen to make my enemies pay for their crimes. I'd chosen to become someone who couldn't be pushed around, couldn't be betrayed, couldn't be destroyed. Was I the same man I'd been a year ago? No. Was I a better man? That was for others to judge. But I was a stronger man, a more dangerous man, a man who'd learned that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to become what your enemies fear. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I opened it to find Curtis standing on my porch, holding a 6-pack of beer and wearing a grim expression. "We need to talk," he said. I let him in, and we sat in my living room drinking beer in silence for a few minutes. "You know I've been your friend for 25 years, Curtis finally said. "Yeah. And you know I'd do anything for you, anything to help you and your family." "Yeah. But I have to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." I looked at him and saw something I'd never seen before in my best friend's eyes. Fear. "Ask me. Are you done? Is this over? Or are you going to keep going until someone gets killed?" I thought about his question. Was I done? Had I gotten enough revenge to satisfy the thing that had been growing inside me since the night Jake put a gun to my son's head? "I'm done with Sandra and Jake and Victoria," I said. "They're finished. They'll never hurt anyone again." "That's not what I asked." I met his eyes. "I'm done being the kind of man who lets people walk all over him. I'm done being weak. I'm done being a victim." "And if someone else tries to hurt you, tries to hurt your family?" I smiled, and Curtis actually flinched. Then they'll learn the same lesson Sandra and Jake learned. Curtis finished his beer and stood up. I hope you know what you're doing, Nick. I do. And I hope you remember who your real friends are. I will. After he left, I stood on my front porch and looked out at my neighborhood. The news trucks were gone, the reporters had moved on to other stories, and the circus had left town. But the lesson remained. Everyone on this street now knew what happened to people who threatened Nick Brenner's family. Everyone in this city knew that there were consequences for betrayal, for theft, for violence against innocent people. The word would spread. The story would be told and retold. And somewhere out there, some other Jake Turnbull or Sandra Turnbull or Victoria Martinez would think twice before targeting what looked like an easy victim. Because they'd remember what happened to the last people who made that mistake. I went back inside and poured myself a whiskey. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work. I'd fix servers and install software and live the quiet life of a middle-aged IT worker. But I'd never again be the man who could be pushed around. I'd never again be the husband who could be betrayed without consequences. I'd never again be the father whose children could be threatened with impunity. I'd become something else, something harder, something that predators would learn to fear. And if that made me the villain in some people's stories, well, I could live with that. After all, every hero needs a good villain to keep them honest. And every villain needs a good reason to exist. Mine was sleeping safely in their dorm rooms at Ohio State, protected by the reputation their father had built with blood and cunning and an absolute refusal to let evil win. I raised my glass to the empty house and spoke the words that had become my new motto. Let the world see who the real villains are. And then I smiled, because the world had seen and the world had learned.